Picture this. You're sitting at a blackjack table at 3 in the morning, wearing yesterday's clothes, drinking your 4th complimentary watered-down cocktail, and you're down about $10,000. The rational part of your brain, the part that remembers your sugar baby is expecting her allowance next week, is screaming at you to leave. But there's another voice, quieter but somehow more persuasive. Whispering that the next hand could turn everything around. That voice, it's not just optimism, it's not even stupidity, though it might look like it from the outside. It's something far more interesting. It's your brain doing exactly what evolution designed it to do, which is to say, completely misunderstanding how probability actually works. Now, before you think this is going to be a lecture about why gambling is bad, and you should save your money and invest in index funds like a responsible adult, let me stop you right there. This isn't about whether you should or shouldn't gamble. This is about something far more universal and far more interesting. Why human beings are spectacularly, almost beautifully terrible at understanding randomness, and why that same terrible understanding is actually what makes us capable of achieving extraordinary things. Because here's the thing. Nobody tells you about probability. It doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care about your story. It doesn't care that you've lost the last 7 hands in a row. And it definitely doesn't care that you really, really need to win this next one. Probability is the universe's way of saying, I'm not mad at you. I'm not rooting against you. I literally do not know you exist. And yet, we persist. We keep playing. We keep trying. We keep believing that somehow, some way, we're different. And you know what? Sometimes that delusion is exactly what we need. Let's talk about the gambler's fallacy for a minute, because it's such a perfect example of how our brains work. The gambler's fallacy is this beautiful piece of flawed logic that says if something happens more frequently than normal during a given period, it will happen less frequently in the future. Or vice versa. If you flip a coin and it comes up heads 5 times in a row, your brain starts whispering that tails is due, that somehow the universe is keeping score and needs to balance things out. The coin, meanwhile, has no memory. The coin doesn't know it came up heads 5 times. The coin doesn't care. Every single flip is a completely independent event with exactly the same 50-50 odds as every other flip. The probability doesn't change just because you really want it to. But here's where it gets interesting. That same flawed thinking, that same refusal to accept that past results don't influence future outcomes, is exactly what allows people to keep trying after repeated failures. Think about every successful entrepreneur you've ever heard of. Most of them failed multiple times before they succeeded. Most of them had moments where a rational assessment of the probabilities would have suggested they should give up. And yet they didn't. They kept going. They kept believing that the next attempt would be different. Were they wrong about the probability? Absolutely. Were they wrong to keep trying? Well, that depends on whether you think success is the only metric that matters. Let me tell you about a concept from psychology called the illusion of control. It's this fascinating phenomenon where people believe they have more influence over random events than they actually do. Gamblers exhibit this constantly. They blow on dice. They have lucky seats. They wear lucky shirts. They develop elaborate rituals and superstitions, all designed to influence outcomes that are fundamentally random. Now, rationally, we all know that blowing on dice doesn't change the probability of rolling a 7. We know this. And yet people do it anyway, and not just unintelligent people. Smart people. Educated people. People who could probably calculate the actual odds if you asked them to. Why? Because the illusion of control feels good. It feels better than accepting that you're at the mercy of pure chance. It gives you a sense of agency in a situation where you have none. And more importantly, it keeps you engaged. It keeps you trying. It keeps you in the game. And here's the sarcastic truth that nobody wants to hear. Sometimes staying in the game, even when the odds are against you, even when probability suggests you should quit, is exactly the right move. Not because the odds change, they don't, but because the value of playing isn't always measured in dollars or wins or tangible outcomes. Let's do a thought experiment. Imagine you're playing a slot machine. You know, intellectually, that slot machines are programmed to pay out less than they take in. That's how casinos make money. The house always wins in the long run because the probabilities are literally built into the machine to favor the house. This isn't a secret. This isn't insider information. This is just how it works. And yet, people play slot machines. Lots of people. Smart people. People who know better. Are they all just stupid? Are they all just bad at math? Or is something else going on? Here's what I think is happening. People aren't playing slot machines because they think they're going to beat the odds. I mean, some people are, and those people might actually have a problem. But most people are playing because the experience of playing, the anticipation, the hope, the possibility, even the losing is worth something to them. It's entertainment. It's excitement. It's a break from the deterministic grind of everyday life, where everything is predictable and safe and boring. When you pull that lever or press that button, for just a moment, anything is possible. You might lose, you probably will lose, but you might win. And that might is worth the price of admission. Now, let's talk about expected value, because this is where probability gets really interesting. Expected value is a mathematical concept that tells you the average outcome of a random event if you repeat it many times. In gambling, it's usually negative, meaning that over time you're expected to lose money. The casino has done the math. They know that even though individual people will win, sometimes big, overall, the crowd will lose. But here's the thing about expected value. It only matters if you're playing infinitely many times. If you only play once or a few times, expected value tells you almost nothing about what will actually happen to you personally. You could beat the odds. You could win big. It's unlikely, but unlikely doesn't mean impossible. This is what drives people crazy about probability. It's simultaneously true that you probably won't win and that you might win. Both things are true at the same time, and humans are really, really bad at holding two contradictory truths in their heads simultaneously. So, we simplify. We focus on the one that makes us feel better. We focus on the might. And you know what? Sometimes that's exactly what we should do. Think about it this way. If you made every decision in your life based purely on expected value, based purely on what's most likely to happen, you'd never take any risks. You'd never start a business, because most businesses fail. You'd never ask someone out on a date, because most people will say no. You'd never try anything new, because familiar activities have known outcomes and new activities are uncertain. You'd be perfectly rational and completely miserable. The paradox of probability is that understanding it correctly often means living a smaller, safer, more boring life. Not understanding it or choosing to ignore it opens up possibilities. Not always good possibilities, and you have to be careful not to destroy yourself in the process, but possibilities nonetheless. Let me give you a concrete example. Let's say you're trying to break into a creative field like writing or music or art. The probability of success is low, really low. Most people who try to make it as professional artists don't make it. That's just the statistical reality. If you were purely rational, you'd look at those odds and say, well, this is a bad bet. I should do something safer. And maybe you'd be right. Maybe you'd go into accounting or software development or whatever, and you'd make good money and have a stable life, and that would be fine. But what if you're the exception? What if you're one of the people who beats the odds? You'll never know if you don't try. And this is where the gambler's mindset, that irrational belief that you're different, that the rules don't apply to you, that you're going to be the one who makes it, becomes almost necessary. Not because it changes the probability, it doesn't, but because it gives you permission to try anyway. Of course, there's a flip side, and it's important to acknowledge. The same mindset that allows you to pursue unlikely dreams is the same mindset that can lead you to make terrible decisions. The person who keeps buying lottery tickets, despite losing thousands of dollars, isn't being brave or optimistic. They're being self-destructive. The person who keeps doubling down at the roulette table, trying to win back their losses, isn't showing admirable persistence. They're showing an inability to accept reality. The difference between noble persistence and pathological denial is often just a matter of degree and context. And here's where it gets tricky. There's no clear line. There's no formula that tells you when to keep going and when to quit. If there were, life would be a lot easier and a lot less interesting. What there is, though, is this. Probability can tell you what's likely to happen on average over many attempts, but it can't tell you what will happen to you specifically on this attempt. And that gap between what's probable and what's possible is where all of human ambition lives. Let's talk about the concept of variance for a second. Variance is a statistical measure of how spread out results are around the average. High variance means that individual outcomes can be very different from the expected value, even though over time things average out. Low variance means individual outcomes tend to cluster close to the expected value. Gambling games typically have high variance. You could lose everything immediately, or you could win big. Over thousands of hands, the math works out and the casino makes money. But on any individual night, anything can happen. Life is also high variance. Some people get incredibly lucky. Some people get incredibly unlucky. Most people get some mix of both. And we spend an enormous amount of mental energy trying to figure out which category we're in and what it means. The human brain hates variance. We're pattern-seeking machines. We want to believe that good things happen for a reason, that bad things happen for a reason, that there's some underlying logic to the universe. We want to believe that hard work is always rewarded, that being a good person leads to good outcomes, that karma is real. But probability doesn't care about any of that. Probability says that sometimes bad things happen to good people, and sometimes terrible people succeed wildly. And there's no cosmic justice, there's just randomness and variance, and occasionally someone gets lucky or unlucky in ways that have nothing to do with what they deserve. This is deeply uncomfortable, so uncomfortable that most people reject it entirely. They construct narratives about why things happen, about what it all means, about what they can control. And you know what? Those narratives are useful, even if they're not strictly accurate. Because here's the thing, you can't live a meaningful life while constantly acknowledging that nothing matters and everything is random. You need to believe in something. You need to believe that your choices matter, that your actions have consequences, that trying is worth it even when the odds are against you. You need to be, in some fundamental way, irrational. This is the beautiful contradiction at the heart of the human experience. We're capable of understanding probability, of doing the math, of seeing the odds clearly. And yet we choose to hope anyway. We choose to try anyway. We choose to believe that we'll be the exception, even when we know that most people aren't. Is this foolish? Absolutely. Is this necessary? Also absolutely. Let me tell you about something called the hot hand fallacy. It's related to the gambler's fallacy, but slightly different. The hot hand fallacy is the belief that someone who's been successful at a random task is more likely to be successful at it again. Like a basketball player who's made several shots in a row is somehow hot and more likely to make the next shot. For decades, psychologists insisted this was purely a fallacy, that human beings were just seeing patterns where none existed. But recent research has suggested that maybe, just maybe, there's actually something to it. Not because probability changes, it doesn't, but because confidence and momentum are real psychological phenomena that can actually affect performance in certain situations. So maybe the hot hand isn't entirely a fallacy. Maybe believing you're on a streak actually makes you more likely to succeed, not because the universe cares, but because your brain works differently when you feel confident and successful. This is the sneaky way that our irrational beliefs sometimes become self-fulfilling prophecies. You believe you're going to win, so you play more confidently, so you actually do slightly better. You believe you're going to succeed, so you try harder and take smarter risks. So your odds of success actually do improve marginally. Notice I said marginally. This isn't some law of attraction nonsense where thinking positive thoughts magically alters reality. The math is still the math. Probability is still probability. But human psychology is complex enough that sometimes believing something can make it slightly more likely to happen, even if the underlying randomness hasn't changed. Which brings us to an important distinction. There's a difference between games of pure chance and games of skill. In a game of pure chance like roulette or slots, your decisions don't matter at all. The outcome is entirely random. The house edge is fixed. There's no amount of skill or practice or belief that will change the probabilities. But in games of skill, like poker or blackjack, if you're counting cards, your decisions do matter. The underlying events are still random. The cards are still shuffled randomly. But how you play those cards affects your outcomes. You can actually get better. You can actually improve your odds. And life, fortunately, is much more like poker than roulette. Yes, there's randomness. Yes, you can get dealt a terrible hand. But how you play matters. Your choices matter. Your skills matter. And that means that persistence, that refusal to give up even when the odds look bad, can actually be rational in a way it never is at the slot machine. This is what people mean when they talk about making your own luck. You can't control whether you get dealt pocket aces or 7-deuce offsuit. But you can control how you play whatever hand you get. You can control whether you fold immediately or try to make something happen. You can control whether you learn from your mistakes or keep making the same ones over and over. And over time, over enough hands, the person who plays well will do better than the person who doesn't, even if individual outcomes are still largely random. So, when should you quit? When should you walk away from the table, metaphorically or literally? The mathematical answer is when the expected value of continuing is negative and you can't afford the variance. If you're playing a game you can't win and losing will hurt you materially, then yes, you should quit. But the human answer is more complicated. Sometimes you should quit when you're ahead. Sometimes you should quit when you're behind. Sometimes you should never quit at all, even when the math says you should, because the trying itself has value that can't be captured in expected value calculations. There's this concept in behavioral economics called sunk cost fallacy, where people continue investing in something because they've already invested so much, even when the rational choice would be to cut your losses and move on. I've already put 5 years into this relationship. I can't quit now. I've already spent $10,000 on this business. I have to see it through. This is generally considered a fallacy because past investments shouldn't affect future decisions. The money you've already spent is gone. It's sunk. It shouldn't factor into whether you continue. But you know what? Sometimes the sunk cost fallacy isn't actually a fallacy. Sometimes the fact that you've invested heavily in something is information about how much it matters to you, about how committed you are, about what you're willing to sacrifice. Sometimes quitting after investing so much would be the real mistake, not because of the investment itself, but because of what that level of investment reveals about your values and priorities. The trick is figuring out which is which, and there's no formula for that. You have to know yourself. You have to be honest about why you're continuing. Are you continuing because you genuinely believe in the possibility of success? Or are you continuing because you're afraid to admit you were wrong? Are you being persistent or just stubborn? Are you being optimistic or delusional? These are hard questions, and the answers aren't always clear even to ourselves. We're remarkably good at lying to ourselves, at convincing ourselves that we're being rational when we're being emotional, or that we're being brave when we're being reckless. But here's something to consider. In the grand scheme of things, most of the bets we make in life are small enough that losing them won't destroy us. Most risks are recoverable. Most failures are survivable. And that means that the cost of trying and failing is often much smaller than we think, while the potential upside of trying and succeeding can be enormous. This is why the advice to just go for it is often good advice, even when the odds are against you. Not because the odds don't matter, they do, but because we systematically overestimate the cost of failure and underestimate the value of trying. Think about rejection. People are terrified of rejection, whether it's asking someone on a date, applying for a job, submitting creative work for publication, whatever. The fear of rejection keeps people from trying all the time. But what's the actual cost of rejection? Usually it's just momentary embarrassment. That's it. The person says no, you feel bad for a little while, and then life goes on. Meanwhile, the potential upside, the chance that they might say yes, could be life-changing. A new relationship, a new job, a new opportunity. The expected value calculation, when you actually do it honestly, almost always favors trying, even when the probability of success is low. But we don't do the calculation honestly. We let fear distort the numbers. We imagine catastrophic outcomes that are wildly unlikely. We obsess over worst-case scenarios. And so, we don't try, and we never find out what might have happened. This is the opposite of the gambler's fallacy. Instead of believing we're more likely to win than we are, we believe we're more likely to lose than we are. We believe the costs are higher and the benefits lower than reality suggests. And this kind of pessimistic miscalculation is just as irrational as optimistic miscalculation, but it feels more responsible, more mature, more realistic. It's not. It's just fear dressed up as prudence. Now, I'm not saying you should throw caution to the wind and bet your life savings on a hand of blackjack. I'm not saying probability doesn't matter, or that you should ignore the odds entirely. What I'm saying is that there's a middle path between reckless optimism and paralyzing pessimism, and that middle path involves accepting that probability is real, that odds matter, and that sometimes you should try anyway. Because here's the final piece of the puzzle. Life isn't just about maximizing expected value. It's about experiencing things. It's about trying things. It's about seeing what happens when you take a chance, even if the chance is slim. The person who never gambles, who never takes a risk, who never does anything unless the probability of success is overwhelming, might have a very safe life. They might never lose big, but they'll also never win big. They'll never have the stories. They'll never know what could have been. And at the end of the day, when you're old and looking back on your life, you're probably not going to wish you'd taken fewer chances. You're probably going to wish you'd taken more. You're probably going to regret the things you didn't try more than the things you tried and failed at. This is the paradox of probability and human happiness. Mathematically, the safe choice is often the right choice, but psychologically, emotionally, the risky choice is often the one that makes life worth living. So, should you keep playing when you're down $10,000 at 3 a.m? Honestly, probably not. That's probably a sign you should call it a night, get some sleep, and reevaluate your life choices in the morning. Should you keep pursuing that dream even though the odds are long and the path is uncertain? Maybe. Maybe not. It depends on what it costs you, what it gives you, and what kind of life you want to live. Probability can tell you what's likely. It can't tell you what's meaningful. It can't tell you what's worth it. Only you can decide that. And that's the beautiful, frustrating, liberating truth about gambling and life, and probability and persistence. The math is real, the odds are real, but so is the value of trying. So is the importance of hope. So is the necessity of believing, sometimes against all evidence, that you might be the exception. Ask yourself, why not you?